burst, and with the start of the industrial age, we moved to a second and more contemporary form of the corporation. And this is marked by the invention of limited liability at the beginning of the 19th century, both in the US and in the UK, and the genesis of the modern shareholder. So limited liability basically allows shareholders to not be liable for a company's debt. This is a very simple but groundbreaking invention, and up here I posted a quote from The Economist that basically celebrates this invention, saying that the economic historian of the future would be inclined to assign to the nameless inventor of the principle of limited liability as applied to trade corporation a place of honor with Warren Stevenson and other pioneers of the Industrial Revolution. So basically, shareholding, as we said, allows investors to not be liable for a company's debt. So this is the difference, the main difference from equity, let's say. And so in a sense, we can think about shareholding, or like stocks, as advanced forms of non-commitment. Now, this is a term that I took from Geir Lovink and Drossett, Enrique put me onto them, as thinking about the evolution perhaps of like sociality or modes of relating without, however, having to stake or having stakes in these types of relations. So to go back to the current situation, again, the future doesn't seem to matter because these crazy shareholdings that we are seeing now doesn't really have any stakes. It's not anchored in a collective mode of conceiving of financial relations. So it was, in a sense, only a matter of time. This is a process that started in the, with the industrial age, with the modern corporation, but we see that these, financial technologies, in a sense, have evolved in a way of their own. So, so this is happening. I guess for me, or one way that I read it is that this idea that the future doesn't matter is perhaps related also to the fact that as the barriers to entry into the financial gains have lowered considerably or gone down to zero in the context of these trading apps, and that we'll see also like with blockchain and crypto, it's just making it more explicit. And so the problem is that this is a long quote that I'll go through in a second, but the problem is that, going back to today, is that of a big incentive misalignment between investors and actual, producers, if you want to call it, or companies or projects or initiatives. And exactly today is taking on the generous form. This is very long quote that basically says that investors, shareholders, now have the possibility to get rich while extracting rent and indeterminate speculative value in the form of data assets from gig workers and precarious workers that goes to inflate the company's valuation of the markets instead of being geared towards organic growth and profit. So, and this is again because the logic of current finance is geared towards maximizing shareholder value, as I was saying, instead of organic growth. I take these quotes from a really nice paper that came out recently on data assets by Van Deurne and Barger. And so here it says that the neoliberal logic of human capital mirrors a mode of corporate governance beholden to the imperative of shareholder value, to the extent that it is preoccupied with capital growth or appreciation rather than income, stock value rather than commercial profit. Instead of seeking to maximize returns on investments made, the subject of human capital defers concrete returns in favor of raising the value of the capital to which he or she is identified. In Fair's view, then, insofar as our condition is that of human capital in a neoliberal environment, our main purpose is not so much to profit from our accumulated potential as to constantly value or appreciate ourselves, or at least prevent our own depreciation. In other words, I am songs, which is another meme that circulates in this kind of trading social networks, which I guess, speaks again to the financialization of the self that is at play, I guess, in these environments as finance becoming increasingly social. So the authors further explain that we are actually moving beyond narrow concern with shareholder values because of the emergence of these new techno-socio-financial configuration that they call meta platforms. Meta platforms are venture capital firms and investment funds looking to exploit the network effects and synergetic possibilities that emerge when managing a large and varied portfolio of investments in platform companies and other data-centric businesses, each intent on disrupting different industries by leveraging their analytics capacities. So, and they conclude this long quote by saying that paying critical attention to meta platforms also move us beyond the narrow concern with shareholder value, insofar as the stakes of our analysis do not just pertain to the influence of shareholder objectives on a company's daily operations, but demand that we account for the strategic governance of mutually reinforcing monopoly formations across sectors. So this idea of again of the essentially, again, even if the bar to entry has gone down to zero, it doesn't really, this new wave, let's call it, of social finance doesn't really change the mode of engagements or expectations that shareholding creates. So in a sense, these like YOLO traders are expression of again of this like total financialization of the self, enabled by this mode of social finance, a finance according to the logic of social platforms as they currently exist. And we'll see whether blockchain changes that and to what extent. So the derivative form, in a sense, as the quintessential expression of the capacities of time manipulation of a contemporary financial capitalism, we see very clearly that it is social, but I think the modes through which this sociality is expressed are very much open for discussions. That perhaps there haven't been that many experiments, like novel way to conceive of these relations in a different ways. Okay, this is another, just a note on the topic of the data assets. There has been a recent paper by Salome Biglioin, which is a legal scholar, in which it differentiates between proprietarian and dignitarian approaches to data assets, pointing to the limitations of both, which I guess we'll go back to this later, but I just wanted to leave it here, or like put a note as something that could be interesting for the sphere, particularly in the context, and the Anarchive in particular, given that as we are creating a obviously physical, but also very much digital ecosystem, everything becomes data, and then to what extent data can become money in a sense, or like instrument of like monetization, if you will. But again, we can go back to this later. The point I wanted to make in this part anyway was to show that, in spite of all the emphasis on sharing, obviously we know that sharing economy is like a fraud and misleading term, but also the idea of sharing that comes from a lot of I guess critical theories that places emphasis on relationalities, instead looking how the share and the practice of shareholding is precisely the extractive instrument itself. And that's that through which investors and shareholders and these meta platforms, funds can extract value from the workers or people that populate and use daily these platforms. So now we're kind of moving to look at the stake after looking at the share, and getting into discussing some of the blockchain dreams. So 12 years ago, with Bitcoin that just celebrated the 12th birthday of the white paper, arrived unexpectedly and opened up imagination and kind of new possibilities or potentialities for modes of coordination and cooperation. And so crypto, we said, was supposed to change these types of dynamics in current financial systems through places an emphasis on incentive alignments among stakeholders, among which shareholders are just one kind. And so the way in which try to reach this new alignment of incentives is through various mechanisms of staking, precisely, instead of like sharing or shareholding per se. Staking involves locking some forms of collateral in a protocol. So obviously financial capital, but even more so computational resources, validation services, but also less tangible forms of value, such as reputation, bandwidth for decision-making in the case of governance, commitment to a project, in exchange for the benefits derived from participating in the consensus of the system. And importantly, integrating like financial capital more concretely in the functioning of the protocol. And so creating these conditions in which even investors become, to an extent, at stake in the success of the protocol, or even so because if they don't respect the algorithmic rule, they will lose some of their money. They will get punched or slashed, as they say, like in the in jargon. So if the extension of the logic of derivative finance to the cultural sphere is predicated on the fluidification and homogenization of all forms of capital, aesthetic, financial, affective, and reputational, into price, and incorporation of social processes into the imperative of profit, the logic of staking as the socio-financial principle of crypto systems is supposed to work the opposite way. It's about holding tight through risk and uncertainty, and through forms of lock-in and collateralization. So staking is very much related to the concept of skin in the game, which is a great term, a great meme that created, I guess, or made popularized by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, that refers to the extent to which one is invested with money and resources in the success of a venture or a game. So one of the nicest formulations that I found about skin in the game to make it really intuitive to understand is that scars signals skin in the game, right? If you've participated, fought, and maybe lost, like hurt yourself, but then you had skin in the game at the beginning. So how is it that blockchain protocols are supposed to reorganize relations between users of certain platforms or protocols, investors, and producers? Now, there has been a lot of really good work done by some self-defined crypto capitalists, like venture funds, on ungrounding the affordances of blockchains as techno-economic infrastructure. I should clarify that I'm referring these crypto-economic or crypto-capitalists as like maybe it's best understood. Like cycle mostly refer to layer 1 and layer 2 blockchain. So if you think about these blockchains as like a stack of different layers, layer 1 would be the more you know, like would be the one that is closest to the metal, and then layer 2 is the one that is becoming a bit more you know, usable and used, and that builds on the underlying one. And so it's conceivable, I should ask Cem, but I guess it's conceivable that the sphere would probably exist on top of one of these underlying layers. But I think it's interesting to look at these, to look at these, you know, blockchain protocols in just to get a sense of what the sphere in its blockchain form would need to, you know, like relate to, or like relate with, in a sense. So what here it's called miners, basically it's producers. And so in the emblematic case of Bitcoin, the producers are the miners that validate the blocks, and they create blocks and validate transactions in a decentralized manner, so that users on the other side can benefit from the services and value generated by these protocols. And the interaction between producers and users is mediated, is automated by the rules embedded in the you know, in these protocols, in a sense. And then on the other side, you have investors, which are, like in the current system, people that you know, provide the financial capital to the producers and obtaining, in a sense, like or recoup the value, or like the returns on their investments from the users and people using these protocols. So I was thinking also that because yesterday we mentioned again the plantoid, perhaps just looking at the relation between, if we consider miners again as any kind of producers, basically the plantoid, I guess, could be understood as this loop, or as the relation between, the miners on the one hand and the users on the other. The producers being, I guess, the artists that get hired by the protocol on the basis of users signaling or feeding the protocol or the plantoid itself with you know, with like Bitcoin or whatever it is, like cryptocurrency. So, but then I guess you know, plantoid is also like a fairly small examples in the case of some like larger protocols. Protocols that run, I don't know, storage space in a decentralized manner, or protocol that we're going to talk about it briefly, used for decentralized finance. That's where you kind of need the whole like three roles interacting with each other in a way. So, okay. Oh, and also maybe I should say that what here is called token, which is again a bit of a playful term that refers to a scarce and generally transferable unit of value that can represent ownership or access or voting rights, or again, oh yeah, financial you know, value, or like that relates, that is generated by such networks governed by these protocols through the participation of all these different like players or stakeholders. So another perhaps interesting things about these protocols is that from the same like placeholder, protocols contrarily to companies, and so therefore like companies run platforms, they are minimally extractive, they're supposed to be minimally extractive coordinators. So while a company, the biggest difference is that when a company chooses the distributors and the suppliers, in protocols, it is the market and not the company that chooses, again, distribution and supply. And so the assumption is that this is good because the market always looks for the cheaper and better option in theory. But I guess this may hold true for like certain kinds of digital services perhaps, but we'll see. Maybe remains an open question to see the extent to which it's good to leave these decisions to the market, and who is the market in the case of the sphere, perhaps, like just some ideas here. So, okay, these are when good protocols are supposed to be like better ways to coordinate than platforms or companies. But then 2020 hit, and so there is this nice quote by Zizek, which I think resonates perhaps a lot, or like this is how I feel about these blockchain dreams. So one of the most disgusting things is when what you secretly dream about is brutally imposed on you from the outside. We have a nice name for a realized dream. It is called a nightmare. So we wanted decentralized, social and financial relations, etc. And that's when, as the YOLO traders were like going, taking the Wall Street by storm, that's when also the so-called summer of DeFi started. DeFi stands for decentralized finance, which is again another attempt to democratize the access to finance, but through blockchain-based tools. And in spite of the initial promises or perhaps ambition, ended up taking on traits conspicuously resemblant to the case that we just saw before. So maybe just to give a quick explanation or like overview, decentralized finance, or DeFi, is based, the mechanism, the staking mechanism at the core of DeFi is based on providing collateral and liquidity to for the most disparate kinds of financial activities. So lending, borrowing, insurance, synthetic derivatives as well, and governance over the risk parameters of these protocols that basically end up acting as decentralized banks. So this led to the phenomenon of yield farming in the just a few months ago, where hordes of crypto natives that normally interact on Twitter or like on Discords lock tokens in some of these new protocols, often unaudited protocols, named after food or whatever other thing, like in exchange for absurdly high yields that are calculated annually, but they generally change daily or in the span of like a few hours. And as it happened, they end up losing everything as these protocols get hacked. So just to give an idea of the absurdity of this trading strategy of decentralized finance in these degenerate recent forms, I took this a little explanation from a newsletter, from a crypto newsletter titled "The Rise of Derivative Shitcoins," which I think is quite indicative. So an example of a trading strategy of this like harvest protocol. So add USDT, which is that stable coin, to like based on the dollar to harvest, and earn Swerve token plus 75% annual percentage yield. In return, get this F USD, which is the same as the previous one, but where the F tokens signals or indicates the harvest version of liquidity providers tokens. Then take the FUSDT and lock it into another protocol, like into the earn section, and start making another 168% APY, like annual percent yield. So, and then it goes on and it shows like a bunch of this like absurd and ridiculous like yield farming strategies. We basically like take the the logic of staking, but kind of accelerated again, like and you know, abstracted in any abstracted from any of the original concerns, let's say with the you know, like protocols like collectively define and maintain like security or health. So this is just again just an idea, but on the other hand, and this is, I guess, one of my favorite memes that I guess gives a bit of an aesthetic indication of the you know, these types of like new subjectives emerging in this space of like social crypto finance. So you have the virgin trader versus the Chad yield farmer, and so the yield farmer is you know, this like chilled kind of character that pumps the price on low liquidity dexes, plants token in Perseid protocol, relaxes while yields grow. Like this is all well and good and like you know, funny indication, I guess, of the spirit and the sentiment of this micro community, but with a lot of you know, value, let's say, at stake, at disposal, and also the possibility to just like print algorithmic money over algorithmic money on the basis of these like automated protocols. But then, you know, as it happened, some of these examples ended up with like big drama and like protocols being hacked. But again, like I guess it goes back to this idea of like the future doesn't matter. Doesn't matter for YOLO traders, doesn't matter for yield farmers. Now, this is another one of like my favorite of these like protocols, yield farming protocols. I like this because it shamelessly presents itself, but this is taken from its website, as a game theory for degenerates. The people participating in this DeFi space like to call themselves like degens, degenerated like characters that don't even care about all the risk that they're like taking on, I guess. So yeah, exactly. So like I think that there's like a, you know, nice parallels to be drawn between the YOLO traders that meet on Robinhood and Wall Street bets, and the DeFi degens that again similarly meet on like some other social networks and move like markets with the sheer force of like memes in total disregard for the future as such. So again, like we see that in spite of the initial excitement about blockchain, it kind of ended up reproducing very familiar dynamics. So arguably, these DeFi degenerates have more stakes than these YOLO traders, but neither of them changes the logic of neoliberal reason articulated by Martin Koenig in his recent book, Capital of Time. This is like a long quote, but I read it because I think it's very telling, and for me, it like really already explains what's been going on in this like crazy summer of markets going insane. So actors know that other actors face epistemic limitations similar in nature to the ones they are facing themselves. And this becomes something they strategize around. In the logic of double contingency, the outcome of our investments is to a large extent determined by the investments they induce. And so it is often much more important to be known in this or that way than to expand one's knowledge. Control in a risk society depends on being known in a context of pervasive uncertainty, the ability to serve the central point of reference in the specular logic of contingent claims, as an attractor for other speculative investments. In this context, the purposeful creation of uncertainty and insecurity can even be a source of advantage, allowing actors to shore up their normative position. It is this modality of endogenous hierarchization that I've sought to capture with the concept of leverage, a mode of ordering that works not by eliminating uncertainty, but by capitalizing on it. A system is in many ways an ecology of ignorance. The creation of a new systemic dynamic is possible because leveraging plays on the uncertainty that existing systems experience as they move into the future. At work here is a particular interaction of memory and expectations. So I think this idea of like leverage and control by being known, it plays very well with the with the examples that I said about. They like both these kinds of characters like take on cheap leverage, essentially like cheap debt or like margin, and like swarm the digital unconscious like platforms with like memes and like cheap posts that travel at the speed of platforms feed and like spread everywhere in a sense, and they make themselves known through these like meme making in a sense, and they try and attract other, like get other people to play their same moves in a sense. So is a logic that plays very much on this like her mentality in a sense. But if everybody thinks that that the future doesn't matter, and everybody thinks that because of this reason there's going to be rising asset prices like the case we saw before, then it's fine. Everybody, this is like a very self-reflexive like logic in a sense, but I think it's it's a nice way to explain these types of like dynamics that we've seen. And I think that it is when the future becomes like totally absorbed in this apparently inescapable infinite present that it doesn't matter anymore, like when it is just like leveraged and capitalized at each step of the way. So here we move to, I guess, the last part of this kind of overview of like the current finance and crypto finance landscape. And so the reason why I wanted to present these examples from traditional finance and crypto finance like back to back is to show what happens when you socialize something that was already broken to begin with. So just putting it on a blockchain doesn't automatically fix it. Or maybe another question that for me remains open, but that is one that is an open investigation, is that are even blockchains exacerbating these tendencies? For me, it's still like an open question. So as I said before, like finance is necessarily social, but the forms of this sociality still need to be thought through, I think, and experimented with like a bit more, instead of reproducing the logic of shareholding and no stakes, basically. So, okay, so here I kind of try to map out what we discussed, some of the cases discussed, with other modes of socio-financial organizing, quite familiar, according to two axes, like the axis of sharing or staking, which is related to the financial gesture. Gesture being a term that I understand poetically, but then I'm looking forward to hearing like Eric talking more about it like tomorrow. And the scope of this gesture. So whether it's something that happens or like alone or together, how do you, what are the returns like calculated on? What's the scope of this financial gesture? So, right, I put the YOLO traders here, like in the sense that they still share alone. So in a sense, they're like, they do take on leverage, and one could argue that they have a lot more to lose than investment funds or venture capitalists. But again, this is like, you know, as I said before, like cheap leverage, normally subsidized by the companies that harvest the data assets generated by you know, the platforms that these characters use for their trades. Should also be said that Robinhood valuations, these applications that I mentioned from before, is in the orders of the tens of billions USD. So there's a lot of you know, value that still I mean, there's, you know, there's a lot of the value that is generated by these people using this platform is still like totally captured by the company, by the platform behind it. So again, one could say that there is some taken, but it's still very much self-involved. So I kind of put it like more towards the center of this chart. On the other side, yeah, like these DeFi degens, one could argue that they have more at stake than these YOLO traders, and maybe they even go to like have some semblance of the sharing together insofar as they benefit from the appreciation of these tokens as they you know, gain traction like on the market. But then this is normally based on this basis of this like herd mentality, in a sense, where everybody copies everybody else's you know, like behavior, or like this logic of double contingency, in a sense. So again, there are like some forms of individual stakes and staking, but does it really matter? For me, that remains the question. And then instead, looking on the other side of the chart, what would it mean to navigate this in a different way? So we know like the various limitations of unions and co-ops, like they don't really scale, they bear all the costs for themselves, etc. And then we kind of also know the limitations of the commons, as instead maybe the example of the you know, the sharing together kind of aspect, but you know, comes with the, you know, free riders problem, tragedy of the commons, etc. So, but then again, what can we learn from these examples? And perhaps what can we learn from the rotating savings and credits associations that have existed for a very long time in non-Western countries, such as the cheat funds in India, or like tiendas in Central and South America, like Chama in Africa. And maybe why not? What can we also learn from the original spirit of venture capital and the joint stock companies that has, however, increasingly taken on a key role in the extractive practices of meta platforms. And that's why I put it like right here in the like top right, and you know, sharing alone kind of scenarios. And I kind of started to name these different scenarios in different ways. So the sharing alone would basically be advanced forms of unknown commitment. The staking alone is this degenerated futurelessness. The staking together, that's where I call it the fan of finance, as in the end of finance, perhaps, or something that goes back to the etymology of the term finance as like from the Latin finis, like to end, to close the relation between creditor and debtor, like. But then I wouldn't even know exactly how to, you know, name this new landscape, or this new trajectory that I think we all want to like venturing together. So I hope we can discuss all this you know, a little more later. And so for me, these are the, I guess, the key questions like that remained open and like to discuss with regards to how the sphere can make use of some of these technologies, both, like technological infrastructures, but also financial technologies, against the backdrop of the current, I guess, like socio-techno-financial configuration. So what kinds of staking? So blockchain showed us that we have an organizational problem, but they do not solve the problem of coordination and accountability among human beings. So staking only matters if it is actually collective, if it is about holding costs and risks together in meaningful ways. So for staking to be meaningful, what qualities does it have to, what qualities does it have to relate to, perhaps? Are we just talking about financial capital, or perhaps what kinds of other resources do need to be at stake, knowing that, as we said at the beginning, we are already at stake all the time. So I'm wondering also how to protect perhaps stakes, and so how to make some of these other resources legible without immediately equating them with price, if that's even possible or desirable. Or maybe how to integrate financial capital in more effective ways, not merely for accumulation, but also for expenditure, perhaps, towards something other and generation of other kinds of values. And then, again, what's the duration of this kind of staking, and who can afford to stake and for how long? Which means, again, withstanding all the risks associated with these kinds of holding in time. And then, like, as a side, as a tangent, this is maybe where I see the concept of radical bureaucracy, like, resonated a bit more. That's something like a really strange term that, again, I learned from Enrique mentioning, that comes from Christopher Roth video, The New Serenity 2038, in which it kind of like just throws it out there, like, and so, yeah, what maybe is this a way of conceiving of different kinds of institutions, or different forms of institutionalizations? Open question. Then with regards to data assets, so we see that blockchains enable the mobilizations of other types of resources beyond financial capital, making them liquid but also transactional. And so as data are becoming assets imbued with speculative value in potential that can be monetized if made useful, what kinds of resources should be tokenized and what should be absolutely defended from capture and tokenization? Or maybe how to subject the use to different rules. And can we think about frameworks to think about data beyond the simple property that we know, again, is a model that is already, that doesn't really map with what we are talking about when we're talking about data, or like digital kind of like assets. Then who bears which costs, which goes back to the idea of who skins in whose game. So who is the user of the sphere or the staker, and what he or she risks, basically. So because for me, skin in the game doesn't, skin in the game doesn't really address the problem of power asymmetries. And so I think, maybe another way of saying is that how do we protect all the skins from getting hurt? Like when we are dealing with, such ecosystems where there's, a lot of different interests and a lot of different, like incentives, perhaps, relating with each other. So, and maybe again, it goes back to the fact that blockchains, as they are, as they exist these days, are creatures of the market. No? And the market is a place of trolls, degens, shit posters, speculators. And so this is where, for me, the question of defensibility becomes really important. And maybe also how to think about the cycle that I showed before, but like with the different actors, and the actors that, and how to think about these types of incentives. Perhaps is less about doing away with the intermediaries and third parties, because as we've seen, like even investors are part of the loop in a contemporary like blockchain techno-economies, but maybe how to re-articulate the relations and balances between these actors. So, and then the last point that I kind of like pointed to before is this idea of how to close the loop, or maybe create different kinds of loops. So contemporary degenerate markets and meta platforms have turned the logic of finance, meaning like ending, into one of infinite growth. And that has led to this like degenerated version of markets. So can we think about regenerating? Like how can we think about a regen kind of finance? I don't know, like this is maybe a bit more of a dream, but I guess these are like the kind of questions that are still on my like open for me, and that I think could be interesting to discuss in the context of the sphere. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Cool. I can't think of a better resource than Laura's presentation about DeFi. Actually, this is really like in many ways sort of setting the frame. That's DeFi is moving very fast, and like nobody does this work that Laura is doing to sort of formalize these, not only formalize but articulate these frames. So I think yes, this is the best resource so far. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I posted here in the chat a link to the Planetoid and to Alex Danko newsletter that we mentioned, and and I'll be happy to share like these slides that have like links to different things in the Slack maybe. But there's a lot, and clearly as you can see, it's really moving very, very fast, and so for me these the questions of building a platform or a protocol or tools using these structures is still very exciting, because I really think that there is a lot of potential, like with the, about at least possibilities, or like try to experiment in different ways. But then through blockchains in terms of like creating alternative modes of organizing. And then I also see that this is their reality in a sense of like what's practically going on. And so the question of staking, or the question of who can, what do we really want to stake in this environment, and like who can afford to stake as things are moving so fast and changing so fast, it remains an open question, maybe like moved more by some kind of like concern with knowing that we are already like precarious workers, and so that's the space, this open sea, like full of like strange creatures that we're venturing in. But the fact that we're doing it together already, like, and we can have these conversations, is certainly like I guess really really energizing kind of thing.
Yeah, Laura, one thing that I sort of want to take or like just pick your brain about is sort of this divide between the financial world and the social one. So both these communities that you are, not both actually, there's multiple communities that we have covered, the conventional finance, the YOLO traders, the degens, and potentially the dream of the regen. And if you look at how, in which environment they exist, they're always a highly quantified and financial realm. So I think for an organization like the Sphere, the big challenge is sort of bridging this gap between the, you know, off-chain or you know, social layer with the financial layer. How to sort of, you know, you said an open sea with interesting creatures. I kind of think it's like an aquarium of interesting creatures, because it's like, or at least its access is limited to those who are familiar with its interface, not to sort of, I mean, everyone is impacted by the sort of the seismic effects of finance, but not everyone can actually interface with it, or, you know, sit on the table of where the game is actually played. So yeah, and I think, you know, blockchain also makes that very visible, because, you know, when you talk about creating a blockchain-based system for the commons, you're immediately faced with this problem: how is everyone going to use this like extremely complex instrument? So just wondering, what are your thoughts on like how does finance find its way into the social sphere?
Yeah, well, yeah. So how finance find its way into the social sphere? And so one answer, I think, is that he does it anyway. But then maybe how do you?
Or maybe I can say how the social sphere finds its way towards finance, and that would be,
that's maybe like, I think the big question, or how to you know, how to think about re-articulate some of these financial relations in a way that they're not, again, hyper individualized, as still in the case, like, even, you know, as you certainly know, like the case of this like DeFi and like degenerates, is everything is still based on adversarial and opportunistic behavior. So there is not much thinking for the other. It's always kind of some thinking against the other, or how can I make more money for myself and get more yield, like, versus everybody else, like, and then, you know, brag about it online. I think, yeah. So, but then what kinds of like speculation, you know, does it need to be at play? That's I haven't seen that much out there. But then also, I guess the other question is, even if you manage to create some like collective or collectively, you know, defined like financial kind of instrument, or like a regenerative like cycle, how do you defend that from anyone else that could come in from the outside and try and take advantage of that in any way? I'm sure that, I mean, there's like contractually, I think there's like many ways to think about this, you know, these kinds of problems, these kind of questions. But then maybe it's more of a matter of creating constraint, like enabling constraints, rather than you know, keep everything open, I guess. Yeah. I get, you mentioned, Chen, yesterday, circles, which for me is also like a really, you know, one of the nicest like examples of like some actual, you know, new attempts at like creating alternative models. Like, and I find it extremely speculative in its, you know, goal of define speculation, and like making so explicit you know, the idea of like money as a collective hallucination, and like creating this algorithmically you know, like coordinated distribution of you know, creation of the money, like or like, you know, numbers in an account in ways that in a sense is just making more explicit things that are already happening. But on the other side, that does not solve maybe some of the problems that the sphere have in terms of who funds these productions, like where is the money coming from, and if the money is still coming from you know, public grants, for instance, how to perhaps create alternative you know, ways for some of these stakeholders to feel perhaps more invested in this, in the projects themselves, or like can the sphere find ways to defend its digital soul from whichever market based or kind of requirements or imperatives that come from the current way in which cultural economy is organized. So yeah, these are still open questions.
It was yeah, the thing I've been dreaming about tonight, that has been the quadratic funding and the kind of potential to kind of what I saw in that proposition that I did, that like still it's quite complex to grasp the quadratic funding fully, but anyway, that the audience, that could be the artist or anyone who wants to invest in a particular proposition, then can be matched by this public funding. It was such a and other funding, private funding. Yeah. So it's such a neat way of rewiring something that is in a way that feels so doable. I mean, it was really like an epiphany for me after the conversations, when my brain was cooling down a little bit and I was thinking about it. That it's like, this is actually a solution to something here that I have not seen anywhere else for the culture sector. Actually, like, it's actually a way of letting the governance of the particular art form or part of the art form community-wise can governance the means that come straight from, in this case, maybe combination of Ministry of Culture and perhaps private investors or companies. Or this was a new kind of flow that it just feels so doable, and that connected to the web of trust, perhaps, or something like that. How can we make sure that that is taken care of, the governance is taken care of in a proper way according to the community. This is like circling, and it comes in even more when I'm thinking about looking about precarious workers and the commons in the opposite corners somehow, and actually to combine it. A reflection rather than a question.
But if I can now try and answer again the question that Chen posed at the beginning, which is how do you fold the social into this financial, particularly as we're talking about crypto. That's after thinking and hearing about the quadratic funding, that's for me maybe less of a technical question. It's more having to do with the soft power of seduction, in a sense of how do you get on board people in a new way of doing things. That's there are tools that can make that relatively intuitive, but how do you create an environment that make people that are new to this space to feel quite safe, and how do you modulate expectations there? That's maybe another way that I could think about that, particularly in the context of the quadratic funding. Where would the money and how would you convince the ministry or explain to the ministry of the culture to put their funds into this or that wallet or account, or explain even only how the sphere is thinking about organizing this one. That's that maybe has more to do with the performance art and the circus art itself rather than the technical specifications. But it's this is I see increasingly all these different forces and skills and capacities and ways of attuning that are necessary for creating such a project. But exciting.
Also, if someone digitally want to get into the conversation, it's totally possible. Yes, it is. So, if you have any questions there, or anyone around the table, any reflections, we only have a few. Like, if we shouldn't push the schedule too much, we only have a few more minutes before Yael's presentation also. So it's a bit back to back now. But anything?
I definitely have one more thing, but it's not gonna fit 2 minutes for sure. Well, I think Laura's talk really made the perfect segue towards discussing, Sphere as the digital commons, in the sense that, the common stakeholding requires a certain instrument of, stakeholding, a financial instrument. So I think the tokenization or non-tokenization, as she pointed out in her design questions, I think is the perfect thing to talk about, because a lot of times, like my talk yesterday did not actually intentionally go towards the tokenization part, because I think without having a proper model, without having the right questions that she posed, it's premature to talk about tokenization, and it gives the wrong idea sort of to people as the Sphere as the investment vehicle or whatnot. So I think taking Laura's questions and having another session where we discuss what does it mean for Sphere, for everyone to hold a share of something or a stake of something, what would that look like? What should we rule out? What should we consider? It's definitely an important discussion to have that we have not had already.
Definitely, I'm down to talk about it.
That's a scenario that we should run next week in the game design session, because I guess, I mean, it's funny to listen to you, Laura, because we discuss so much together. So it's like a travel inside our collective brain.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting and symptomatic that the top left corner was left void. And I guess interesting for us, and maybe a Sphere as a research, or Sphere as a collective staking machine, or Sphere as a mechanism for self-transformation, the advanced form of non-commitment that we're experiencing as a society, or we could add advanced form of social fragmentation as of today, after 4 years of Trumpism, and maybe 4 more. There is a moment where the degen fascination is very interesting. I mean, we share it. And then I guess there is like kind of a disjunction that we need to operate. And from which perspective do we assume the Sphere's collective individuation? And like, as Jim was suggesting just before, I guess the market is a rather remote concern. Like, the market exposure is a rather remote concern. And at the same time, yesterday, we were talking with Martin from Steam. He's an expert in IP management and music, and we had a super interesting discussion. And he's also the head of an incubator. And he was saying how, well, you guys, you shouldn't underestimate the power of what you're creating. And you should maybe assume that you could tap in boomers' pockets, you know, and offer them an occasion to maybe believe in the world one last time. So that's where the token would come back, you know, but it's a one-way token into some sort of future. It's not a market per se, but it's going to be a design question that I'd love to discuss more in detail, like run the scenario of, okay, we have the Staatskunst version where we're trying to interface with the public money, and then we can run a version where we're tapping in other types of budgets, other type of, and then the seduction that you were mentioning will play differently. And that's an open question, I think, that we should formalize and run.